Polygon episode number
34.
What is the number, Jeff?
34.
Polygon episode number 34 for November 14th, 2014. Henry Luker, I've returned after a short absence, and I'll continue to be intermittent on my appearances here on Polygon as I have some local basketball stuff that I'm doing during the majority of the winter. You may see me. I believe the next date that I'll be on will be around January, so I was glad to be able to get on tonight. Of course, we have the main host, Jeffrey Wilcox, and we'll hope to have Dan Pope on tonight as well once we can plug him in. But, of course, this is a pre-show. It's going to be short tonight. I just wanted to get in some just our local forecasting stuff before we start the actual show tonight. But first, probably the biggest thing that we can note is the winter issues that we have going across the entire state for tomorrow. Sounds like we're going to have snow begin moving in western Iowa early tomorrow morning and continue moving eastward across the state with high snow accumulations across the northwestern portion of our coverage area, with 3 to 5 inches pretty much from La Crosse down through Parkersburg and over towards Webster City and by Sergeant Bluff, and areas northwest of there looking at 3 to 5 inches. 1 to 3 generally the expectation elsewhere, with trace to 1 inch possible in southeastern Iowa. And a winter weather advisory is in effect for our entire area, and that goes pretty much through tomorrow. There's various times you can look at your local source of weather information for that, or we have information on our website as well. Most of the coverage area, with the exclusion of Grant and all of our Wisconsin counties, those 3 on the border there are not included, pretty much just including Prairie du Chien and areas north of there. But aside from that, that's been generally the story in Iowa. Cold temperatures and other blasts of Arctic air. Unfortunately, looking to make its way back down.
More or less, if you thought the cold air this week was great, wait till Monday. It's going to be worse.
Yeah, not going to get much better as we go towards the new week. So we have that to look forward to, along with probably more snow chances.
And it's going to be snowing way south of here, too. It's going to be snowing in Missouri, the Ohio River Valley. It could be snowing in a lot of places, and there could be snow on the ground in a lot of places by when we join you again next week.
I've looked at a few.
Our guest, I think, is on here.
You see as Dan enters our call. I see a lot of some of the partner stations that joined us. Generally, the expectation is 2 to 3 inches in our region, except for some of our northwestern counties, which may receive upwards of 5 inches in somewhere. I've noticed the weather getting up there.
Oh, I'm liking this already. Please start
like
any camp. This sounds fun already.
Dan, can you hear us?
We can hear him. Dan, if you can hear us, if you're on the Hangout, go to the top and there's a little gear, and it should, which is settings, and it should tell you how you can do the webcam and whatnot and the microphone.
Okay, live.
Well, I can now hear Dan now.
Hello. Hi.
There we go. We're slowly,
But I like this. We haven't run into this problem ever of webcam issues. We've not had that problem. We've had audio issues. We've had everything.
You can hear me, but you can't see me?
Yeah, all we can see is the please start minicam.
Okay, let's try that. I've not done this before, so this turn on camera. It's not doing it.
Which probably means your camera is not liking this Hangout business.
Now I'm kind of stuck with what I've got. My Mac's actually about 7 years old, so
Yeah.
it should work. It's worked before.
My laptop is 2 weeks old, so after my laptop died, and everybody on this program has heard about that over the past few weeks, but so with us seeing Minicam while we're figuring out why that's done, we can continue with what we were doing because we're on the air now.
Okay.
We're doing our other stuff while Dan gets his camera fixed, and if he doesn't, we can blame that snowstorm that's going on up in the Wasatch Front for that.
We're getting an Arctic front tonight, and that's bringing a little bit of snow back down, but we haven't had much in the way of the heavy snow or the real brutal cold that you'd felt back east of the Continental Divide.
Yeah, we like to share.
We did get cold, but it was coldest of the season so far, but not nearly as cold as it was, say, in Casper, Wyoming. Our television audience actually reaches up into southwest Wyoming, and Rock Springs dropped to 15 below zero and had wind chills of about 25 to 30 below zero, and that's part of our audience, and we broadcast up to those folks up there, and they were definitely feeling the cold, but it modified as it reached Salt Lake City, and we had a high yesterday of 32 and a little bit of snow, but not much.
Yeah, we've had quite a bit of snow. We had a little bit of snow on Tuesday. After Monday this week, we were in the 60s. And we had some lower 70s in southeastern Iowa where we're at. And then the Arctic front had to come. And Tuesday morning, people woke up in our area to a snowstorm, which is similar to what would happen in the mountains. You would go from 70 degrees to a snowstorm.
Right.
So I'm thinking, okay, I don't like this already. So, and we've had flurries every day, except today it was sunny, but it barely got to 30.
You think you have it bad, Jeff? Try living up farther north. I have 2 inches of snow on the ground, and it's brutally cold every day. There's no warm up. I think today at noon, when I was looking at the temperature, it was like 18 degrees, which when I left, it was colder.
That's what you get for having a snowpack, whereas I don't have snow on the ground. I just have frozen grass right now.
At least the sun came out this afternoon, but I didn't look outside to see.
That didn't help, though.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help overnight with whatever heat, quote unquote, that we have being kept.
I still am enjoying this Minicam thing. This is so fun. I mean, we've had everything happening, so. But anyway, before we get into the interview, we have some news items to start out with because it seems like everything newsy this week has had relation to weather. Before we get into it, so Henry, there's some news items that you wanted to rant about for a few minutes before we start.
I think probably the 3 biggest headlines that I'll talk about. I haven't gotten to do a lot of weather news lately because I've been off the show so much, but 3 of the main items that I'll be looking at would be I'm not sure if Dan, if your station was somehow affected by this, but first would be the big MWIN and WeatherWire fiasco that happened, which for those that don't know, MWIN is the Emergency Manager's Weather Information Network, which is pretty much a satellite stream of National Weather Service products that come into a computer and then it gets distributed out. That's what our services run off of. We have automated stuff and we have a computer that has satellite ingest and then it pushes it out to people and Facebook and Twitter and all that good stuff. And then WeatherWire 2, and pretty much what happened, I was waking up, what day was it, Jeff? Wednesday or
It was, I think it was Wednesday morning when this all went down, I think.
Wednesday morning, I was woken up and I got out of bed and I'm looking through my phone and I'm subscribed to all the uh, discussion groups for the M1 stuff, and then I have NWS administrative messages, which is pretty much like outages and stuff. And I'm scrolling through, and I'm also subscribed to our website stuff, and I see the good old watch outline updates pop up, which is significant of a severe thunderstorm or tornado watch, which that really caught me off guard, thinking what went wrong in the process. And I have like 30 emails in my inbox looking, and I look through the text, and they're like from 2010, and I'm thinking, what happened here? And I'm reading through, I have these administrative messages that were from 2010. It was like April 27th about severe weather, and I'm thinking to myself, what went wrong? And apparently, I went back through and I was looking through some threads in those groups, and from like 5 a.m. up through like 7 a.m., I think it was, these products were the live products were still being distributed, like the normal stuff that came through. But in addition, we had these 2010 severe weather products, which created a huge problem for everybody. I mean, the Weather Channel was affected because they have their little breaking weather alert system, their little marketing thing. And then we have the National Weather Service, which most of their automated feeds are powered by the stream that we use, the Emergency Managers Weather Information Network. Media people that use that feed, I mean, that all of these things get distributed from text alerts to Facebook to Twitter and everything like that. And once that gets distributed, and if someone's not awake and catching that, which in our case we were all asleep for the most part, except a few of us, I didn't catch that until morning, and there was confusion all across because we service three organizations, small, like under, I know Cirrus Weather down in Kansas, they have around 10,000, and then Weather On has about 5,000, and we have like 2,000. But these text alerts and all these things are getting out about severe thunderstorm and tornado watches, and people are confused to all heck. And we're trying to. Well, it was realized after a while because it was a national issue, but it certainly created a bit of a problem for us. So, Jeff, if you want to kind of discuss that a little bit from your end of things.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with a lot of people that are doing automated stuff, because not everybody can be around. I mean, like Dan can't be up 24 hours a day putting out every single warning and stuff the Weather Service in Salt Lake City is going to put out, because you would never be able to be on. And he's going to come back just a minute because I told him to come to see if we're going to get that. But I mean, and I tried that for a time to try to get every single warning by hand. It doesn't work. That's why you have to have automation. But the problem is with automation, if something like this was to happen, what ends up happening is that you're going to get everything coming in that's old in some cases, and it confuses people. Now, a lot of people realize that it was probably not right, because when you're seeing severe weather in this time of the year here is very rare. Although we had an anniversary of an outbreak a couple days ago that occurred in 2005, I think it was, the November outbreak, Woodward. You remember that, Henry, back then, the Woodward tornado? And the Stratford tornado was in November of 2005. So, I mean, it could happen, but when the temperature outside here was in the teens, I think people thought something was going on. So.
Yeah, but that certainly affected. I mean, most of it, the people that were up were. I mean, we had some friends that were commenting on those posts that got put up, kind of eliminating the confusion. But that's a problem that I hope somebody from the National Weather Service addresses, as it's really hard to kind of fix those issues, especially after the public becomes aware and they get confused by it, and it's just a whole confusing fiasco. And it's kind of scary to think about it because those streams power. I mean, they power a lot of things, and if there is something like that happening where old products get distributed from, say, a severe weather event, those get distributed and people are confused to all heck. I mean, that becomes a problem of, I mean, if they don't know about it, say they get text alerts, but they don't know what's happening, um, they may take shelter thinking that it's, I mean, especially say if it was on a potentially bad severe weather day, say that happens, and that accidentally happens. We still don't know what happened. I haven't contacted or heard anything from the Weather Service about it. But in the end, I mean, I hope they really fix that issue and get things straightened out. Now, Dan, if you can't get your video working, we can just take audio.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's for some reason you can't see a beautiful picture of my face today, which it wouldn't probably scare too many people, I hope. But I'm enjoying the conversation, and I'll stay here along with you, interested in what you have to say, and also happy to share my input and observations.
And Dan,
But with that MWIN thing that occurred Wednesday morning, was your station affected by that in any way?
No, nothing that we didn't have any warnings go out over the air or anything severe that, like you're discussing, that went back to 4 years ago. I am aware, though, of the infiltration of the Chinese into the National Weather Service. I'm wondering if their infiltration had something to do with this, or if this was just a complete, total mishap that was originated from something to do with the Weather Service.
Yeah, that was the next item.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is the second item. I thought the same thing because it was the same day that
They have their own.
it was the same day that this article from the Washington Post came out. It was like I was looking at my phone over lunch and I saw this article and I thought it was related. I was thinking that they.
Okay. That was weird.
I was thinking that the China hacking would have something to do with it, but it wasn't. Just to kind of summarize this Washington Post article, I'll link to it once we get stuff on the website, but hackers from China breached the Federal Weather Network recently, forcing cybersecurity teams to seal off data vital to disaster planning, aviation, shipping, and scores of other crucial uses. And I'm just kind of putting this as a side note. I do remember a story from a while back about a National Weather Service employee getting arrested because Rivers Forecast Center, I believe, or a service hydrologist that got arrested for potentially leaking information about dams. And if you do think, from the public point of view, you probably are thinking, why does it matter? It's just a dam. But if you think deeply about it, the information about these dams are very extensive, and say a terrorist potentially gets access to it. Not saying that happened, guilty until proven, or innocent until proven guilty, rather. But say that did happen, if someone breaks those dams, millions of people can potentially be affected. So I do see that side of things, just as a side note. So there is some confidential information in there that they could have hacked. Not saying that. You probably think of this hacking that what would they access? It's just weather information. But there is some things that are crucial to life and property. But going back into this, the intrusion of this hacking occurred in late September, but officials gave no indication that they had a problem until October 20th. And I remember reading this because, like I said, I get emailed those administrative messages, and they were saying that they had unscheduled maintenance of an issue. I believe it was because something wasn't being sent out via NCAP servers or some sort. But in the end, no officials declined to discuss the suspected source of the attack. whether it affected classified data and the delay notification. NOAA said publicly last month that it was doing unscheduled maintenance on its network without saying a computer had made that necessary. Apparently, Representative Frank R. Wolf, who is a Republican from Virginia, said that NOAA told me it was a hack. And
4 minutes. Think we can do less?
Yeah, whatever you need me to do.
Well, the problem is you have snow, and I really don't want to cut it.
Okay.
This is getting even better. But apparently Salt Lake City has snow, so they got to cover that.
Can they please keep it there?
Yeah,
I don't want snow until after Thanksgiving.
Keep covering your snow, but well, I mean, this has been just 2 events out of a whole swath of issues that the National Weather Service has had. They face constant criticism because the GFS really is not great compared to the European model.
And speaking of that, the GFS is changing the model, I think, later this month or in December.
Yes, they are upgrading that, and I'll be honest, most people are pessimistic about that. But
Hey! I see Dan's picture.
I had to go into my settings. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I finally figured it out. Sorry about that.
But
a little while.
Like I said, that the hacking and the stream issues, that have been just 2 small issues of a multitude of issues that the Weather Service has been working on. You could look at the issues when a communications outage near Chicago during a severe weather event knocked out communications access or internet or phones or anything.
Yeah, that affected us really bad.
WFOs during a severe weather event, which someone had to call on their cell phone, presumably, and manually say where they want the warning. Which, things like that, understand it. You should have some source of backup. I mean, if you're in the National Weather Service and you only have, and I know most offices probably have this. I know Des Moines, I believe, does have it. But you should have a backup source, because you should not go down just because one source of communications goes down in the process. And then we could look at, there's been a bunch of events that have happened that have affected the NWS infrastructure, and it's been in need of upgrades. I could talk about the websites, National Weather Service websites that have been wanting to been upgraded for 3 years, but are only beginning to start that process. There's just a lot of things that I know. Dr. Ussolini is working on that, and they're trying, but with budget issues and all sorts of problems, they're slowly working on it. But it's hard to replace an infrastructure that has worked for so long. But it is time to begin to replace, and you could go into weather radio and all that, but we'll stay away from that. Finally, this is just a normal weather headline across the nation. Looking at national weather, pretty much the big headline would be the snowstorm up in where we are. Winter weather advisories just scattered from pretty much Wyoming all through Iowa, portions of Illinois and Missouri. A lot of.
And then we can ask Dan why he isn't keeping his snow where it is.
Well, we haven't had nearly the snow that we'd normally expect to see yet, because the ridge has been predominantly over the western United States. And now with the AO and the oscillations going on in the Atlantic, the mean pattern should be 6 to 10 days of troughiness in the eastern United States, which leaves us with a ridge in the west. The only thing that's helped us recently is that the storms are breaking underneath and giving us a little bit of moisture. Frankly, we have very little snow at our ski areas, 14 inches at Alta, which normally by this time of the year would have several feet. But the valleys, normally we get about our first inch of snow, or first measurable snow here in Salt Lake City about November 6th. So it's not terribly late for us. It's just that we were very, very wet for a long period of time during the late summer and fall, which is unusual, and then we went completely dry. We had our fourth driest October on record, and we go into November, and we've had only measurable precipitation's been in the last couple of days here in Salt Lake City, so the dry trend has continued, and I think that ridge on the west coast, which may be the predominant weather pattern through the winter, is going to keep the east cold, certainly for the next 6 to 10 days, and probably longer than that.
So you're pretty much saying we're going to be like cold like last winter again. Well, I don't like that.
It certainly looks like it's heading in that direction. Here in Utah, and I've been forecasting the weather for a long time, going back many years, and I've watched the weather patterns, and there appeared to be a similarity to what we had, a pattern to what we had in 1982, which led us into 3 very wet years when hurricanes were forming off of the Mexican coastline and then being drawn northward, and that's what happened several times this year. That same thing happened in 1982. We had the wettest September ever on record here, was over 7.5 inches of rain in Salt Lake City in 1 month, but we were really wet in August, September, and then all of a sudden, October, November, we've completely seen the water turned off. Certainly the monsoon ends, but nothing's come in from the Pacific. So it appears that we're looking at drier weather for the western United States and wetter weather, colder weather east of the Continental Divide. The only saving grace for us would be as the bridge would back up a little bit and allow our prevailing winds are really good from the northwest. They come in and upslope the Wasatch Mountains, and that would be good for us if that ridge would back up. It kind of did last year a little bit and gave the far northern part of Utah above normal snowpack, but the southwest part of Utah was only at 40%. So just from the north to the south was a difference of 110 to 40%. So right now it's appearing that that pattern is setting up again. Maybe a possible cause of the fact that the Bering Sea and the Arctic Ocean is open water and there's more moisture up there, tending to allow the snowpack to develop earlier in Canada, and then the snowpack moves into Montana, parts of the northern plains, and you end up with that pattern of cold air that is allowed to go farther south. And when that sets up, it's kind of a pattern that tends to repeat itself.
So when you're forecasting, because you forecast for the entire state of Utah, there's differences between, say, Salt Lake City and, say, St. George, or, say, in the southeastern part of the state, etc.
Absolutely. In fact,
I mean, you can go from having a lot of snow in the Wasatch to being in the 50s in, say, St. George, down in that valley down there.
2 days ago, we had a temperature that was -7 in Rock Springs, and at the same time, it was 69 in St. George, 60 miles away. That's a huge difference just from north to south. But we have these microclimates that we have to forecast that are very, very specific to areas that are just 10, 20, 30 miles away. Park City, for example, is only 25 miles to the east. Granted, it's an elevation of 2,000 to 2,500 feet higher than Salt Lake City, but in a south pattern, a south wind flow ahead of a storm, they will see a lot of snow, and Salt Lake City will have a downslope off the Ochre Mountains, which are about 5 to 10 miles west of here. And it can snow in Ogden and snow in Provo, which both cities are about 30 miles north and south, but Salt Lake City can have rain because of the adiabatic compression of the winds coming off of a 10,000-foot mountain range into a 44,000-foot valley. It's really amazing how these microclimates are persistent over all of the entire state of Utah, and we even cover southwest Wyoming, southeast Idaho, northeast Nevada, and so the patterns are very different from one place to another.
Is that why you've been in demand at every station in Utah when you've been there? You've been at every station, that because you had to forecast these microclimates in Utah and in the surrounding states going back through the 80s, except for your 2 years at the Weather Channel and then the few years you were in Milwaukee.
That's correct. And I
grew up in Medford, Oregon, I should add too.
A little bit of time in Medford. A couple of times I went to Medford, and the weather there is an awful lot like here, and it's even more dramatic in Oregon because from the Coast Range Mountains, which receive 160 inches of rain, to about 65 miles inland where Medford is, 18.5 inches, and then the Cascades up to 400 to 500 inches of snow, and then east of the Cascades it's a desert with 6 to 9 inches of moisture, measurable precipitation per year. So it's the same kind of pattern in these mountains and valleys. It's just not as dramatic here in Utah as it is, say, in Oregon along the coastline to the inland areas, to the deserts. But we have deserts here where only 3 to 4 inches of rainfall just 100 miles west of Salt Lake City at Wendover. They downslope off of the Ruby Mountains and the Pequops, which are in the northeast part of Nevada. And Wendover is a very dry desert. That's where the salt flats are. And then Salt Lake City, we have the benefit of the upslope along the Wasatch Mountains, where the pattern comes across the Great Salt Lake. Sometimes it'll pick up a little moisture. Sometimes we'll even have lake snow squalls. And we get a lot of snow in the Wasatch, up to 500 inches at Alta. And Salt Lake City averages 65 inches at the airport. And we have what we call the benches, where the Lake Bonneville shoreline used to be, and that's at an elevation of about 5,000 feet. We get about 130 inches of snow there, 25 inches of measurable precipitation when the airport gets about 16 and a half. Alta gets about 60. So, and that's over about a 10 to 15 mile range. So really a variable climate.
Now, you grew up in Utah, given that you've been in the state pretty much all your life, except for a couple of years you were away. Was there any weather event that got you interested in the weather at a young age?
Not one particular weather event that I remember, other than the summer when I was 5 years old. I noticed that the lightning delay of thunder, I couldn't explain that to myself, and I didn't really have anybody to talk with it about. I asked my father, and I don't remember who really explained it to me, but between the ages of 5 and 12, I was very interested in why thunder was different than lightning, and then I started looking at clouds and different cloud patterns. And so as early as 5 is when I remember being extremely interested in the weather. I would sit out on the deck and watch storms come in for hours. My mother always would say she knew where to find me when it was time for dinner, because she'd just go out on the deck and find me looking at the clouds and watching for the storm to come in. So by the time I was 12, my friends used to give me a little bit of a they made a jingle about me. Went na 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 da 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 da. Now stay tuned for Weatherman Pope, and they used to sing that to me. And so it was about 12 when I decided I wanted to be on television. And now my friends say to me, "Oh, I always knew you were going to be on TV," but they were certainly giving me a hard time about it.
So then you ended up going to the University of Utah, I believe, for your meteorology degree. Is that what you went into, was meteorology at the time?
Yes. And I did intend to go into meteorology from the time I was probably junior in high school. I knew about the program. I'd been up to tour a couple of times because I had a friend whose father was a metallurgist, and he was a professor, and that was in the department, the upstairs one floor above. And so they'd taken me up on tours. I'd applied for scholarships and was fortunate enough to scholarship in meteorology at the University of Utah, and then that was my forte. But the question was, because I wanted to get into television, how was I going to do it? And I eventually went down and sat in the lobby of what was the NBC station at the time, and waited for the chief meteorologist. His name was Mark Eubank, to come out so I could talk to him and tell him, that I was really interested in being in television. And he was kind enough to invite me back, and later hired me before I graduated from college. And so I self-taught in television, but I am a meteorologist by degree.
So your first gig was at Channel 2 in Salt Lake City, if I'm right.
Yes, there I did a lot of radio. I would get up every morning, and from about 4 to 7 a.m. I called 28 radio stations. Some were AM and FM, with a total of 47 radio stations, and would do the weather in the morning. And then I would go up to school. Then I would come back and produce for the chief meteorologist in the afternoon, evening. And at first I produced before there was chroma key, so we were writing with the markers on those, and putting up magnets, and having to wash it down with kerosene, believe it or not. We had to use gloves. And then it all shifted to the chroma key era, and I then taught myself how to work the chroma key. And I did do some fill-in television and did one afternoon program for a while before I took my first gig as a chief meteorologist in Medford, Oregon.
And you could talk about that, and then we're going to get to the Weather Channel part for a while. Talk about the couple of years you were in Medford the first time.
Well, the first time was kind of fun because I was young. It was my first chief meteorologist gig, and I was going to a chief position right straight out of my first job, which I had been working at Weatherbank, was the name of the company, as part of KUTV, which was Channel 2. And at the time, I was up for the weekend job at the NBC station, Channel 2, but they took another person. And one assistant news director said to me, that I needed to age a little bit before before I was able to. I was really young looking back in the beginning, so to get this job as a chief meteorologist it was a smaller market, but reasonably close to home and in a place that was kind of exciting weather-wise was a real good was a good thing for me. And it was while I was there I started talking with the Weather Channel, and I was really surprised that they were interested in having me come, but they didn't have anybody from the West. They were hiring people from Penn State, they were hiring people from the Northeast, from Linden State, but they didn't have anybody from the West. And so that's where part of the reason I went back to Medford later in my career was because I didn't feel like I'd ever finished my time there, but I was able to go straight from Medford to the Weather Channel, which was a really good experience and a very nice jump for me.
Can you talk about that transition from going from a small market like Medford going all the way to the Weather Channel there in Atlanta, which is national scale? Talk about that transition and just kind of how that change affected you.
Well, I tried not to let it affect me as far as on a personal level, but it was a big change for sure. I mean, I was working with Jim Cantore before he became the national personality that he is now, and he told me about how he went to Linden State, and I worked with Jeff Morrow, and I actually helped train a few of the on-camera meteorologists that remained for a long time, Vivian Brown, for example, and then a couple of others that were really familiar faces at the Weather Channel. But the thing that was really fun about it was I had a chance to work with these people who were comfortable on the air. I was on the air a lot of hours. We worked 4-day weeks and 10 hours at a time, but when you're on every other hour during the evening when we actually did weather with the Weather Channel, and we didn't have storm stories or anything like that, we were actually doing the weather. And I mean, it's one of the things that I have a hard time watching the Weather Channel now because, back then we really did weather, and I was on probably about the equivalent of 6 years over 2 years. I really got that kind of experience, and I think the transition was fairly easy because when you're doing television, you're looking at a camera. You don't think of yourself like looking out at a national audience or looking at a local audience. So I feel like I transitioned pretty well. It wasn't too much of a problem.
Okay, now that you've opened to the floodgates to that question, what do you think of the Weather Channel today compared to back then, with the winter storm naming, all of the controversial stuff with reality shows, Fat Guys in the Woods, all those great shows there on TWC. What do you think of it today compared to what you worked in back then?
I don't think it's anything like it used to be, but I'm prejudiced to the time that I worked there. There's still good people that work for the Weather Channel, and they do have some sub-weather coverage, but it's not like it was before. Frankly, I think that the Weather Channel definitely took a downturn as far as for those of us who are hardcore meteorologists or anybody who's a hardcore weather watcher. It's a disappointment. Maybe they felt like they could build their audience and make more money by doing storm stories and all of these other things, but I think they left what was their real core audience behind when they did it.
What do you think of their winter storm naming? Do you think that was a good idea, or do you think that should have been left up to the official organization?
I don't like it personally, and I won't use the names on the air because I think it is confusing between what the National Weather Service is putting out and what the Weather Channel is doing. My feeling is that we're partners with the National Weather Service, and it's an obligation for us as media partners to work with them, and they don't name the storms, and it's a lot different naming a storm that's in the winter than naming a hurricane, because how do you know how big that storm is going to be? When do you determine when you're going to name it? And do you name it when it's in the Gulf of Alaska? Because it's a whole different storm when it hits the western United States as opposed to the eastern United States where the greatest population is. So I'm not really in favor of naming winter storms. The only thing it does is maybe garner some attention for the audience out there to start looking and watching, but I'm not sure that everybody's on board in the media to follow the Weather Channel. The other thing is with the Weather Channel, of course, they own WSI, Weather Central. They seem to own just about everything.
Weather Underground, all
right.
Those
so what's going to happen?
Great organizations now put down because of the Weather Channel. That's just my personal opinion. I kind of agree with you on some aspect. I do believe the Weather Channel was much better back before it went all reality and such. I mean, like you said, they still have great personalities. Jim Cantori, a legendary Dr. Greg Forbes. Um, you can name a whole bunch of them. But they, I liked it back when it was core weather. It wasn't all of these. I was watching it briefly, and I saw a commercial for like American horror stories about weather, and I'm just like, really? I mean, you would probably garner larger.
You could see a horror story watching the Weather Channel for 30 minutes and you don't get a single bit of weather. That's a horror story.
And I have to agree that there are times when I've turned the Weather Channel on and cringed because I'm watching something that I thought was, a pretty good product when I worked there, and now it's not nearly what it used to be, and you don't get a weather forecast. So, and until you get your weather on the 8s, but you can get weather anytime you want on your phone or on a tablet or anything else if you want.
So, keeping on your TWC times, what was probably one of your favorite events while you were working at the Weather Channel to cover?
I covered Hurricane Hugo, and then there was Hurricane Hugo, which came close to Atlanta when it made an onshore approach, went through the South Carolina area and then up to Charlotte and did a lot of damage. That was fun. It was exciting. And at the time I was transitioning kind of into an anchor role, so I was talking to those who were out in the field and then tossing back to the studio. So that was an exciting time. I was kind of maturing and moving into a more of a an anchor role, or eventually maybe to being out live on the scenes like Jim Cantori was. But at the time, I was also in the position to move back into local television when I took a job in Milwaukee. But I was growing with the Weather Channel and really enjoyed that. The hurricane season, I worked with John Hope and learned from the master on how to forecast hurricanes, and he trained me personally on several occasions. So that was a lot of fun. It was exciting. Winter storms were fun. I mean, we had everything, and it was like a candy jar almost for anyone who worked in the business to work at the Weather Channel because you're around the weather all the time. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Now, before we go on to the years you were away from the West or the Weather Channel when you were in Milwaukee, talk about John Hope and what he meant to the Weather Channel back in those days. And you were there pretty much near or just around the peak of when the Weather Channel was the Weather Channel, not the non-Weather Channel that it is now.
I was there right as it began to grow and when it was expanding into other arenas, when they were starting to buy up other companies, because frankly there was a time 2 or 3 years before I got there in the mid-'80s when it almost went under, when John Coleman nearly pulled the plug on it with Landmark, who owned the Weather Channel at the time and owned it for a long time. There was a period when it wasn't making any money, and then all of a sudden something happened. The way that they did their positioning, the way that they had hired, and the weather they were producing was there were very few outlets where you could get weather all the time. We didn't have the internet like we do now, and your only ways to really get weather was to either watch your local channel or turn on cable, and you could get your radar, you could get your local weathers, and you could get the weather that we were presenting and covering the entire country. So it was really a good time, and John Hope was a master, and I really enjoyed learning from him, and he cared a lot, and he used to watch every one of us when we did our tropical segments, and he would critique us, and he did it in a really nice and professional way. Spent a lot of time, and we had seminars and training so that we were good on the air and we knew what we were talking about. So it was a lot of fun. And John Hope was just a class act.
Was there anybody else at the Weather Channel that then, and even if they're still there now, which there aren't many from back when you were on, that you really enjoyed watching how they did the weather?
Certainly, there were a lot of very good weathercasters that I enjoyed watching and working with that taught me a lot. I mean, basically, I was the only one from the western United States. Everybody else was either from, like I said, from Penn State or from Linden State or somewhere back east. So those that I remember, Jeff Morrow and Declan Cannon, and those are some of the people that I enjoyed working with. Bill Keneally especially. I loved working with Bill Keneally because he could name every single town and every single county of every single state. And I enjoyed working with George Elliott, he was a good friend, a fun guy to work with. He and I got into trouble sometimes because we'd start laughing while we were on the air. We'd tell a joke or he'd say something funny. He always had he'd say something off air and it would start laughing, and then we'd end up laughing while we were on the air, and that wasn't good. But people always want to know what the joke was. But there really wasn't much of a joke to talk about. But those were fun people to work with.
So then you ended up taking a job in Milwaukee, which is not Salt Lake City and not anywhere in the West. So why did you end up taking Salt Lake City at that time?
Well, I picked Milwaukee because I understand what you're saying. I picked Milwaukee because it was in severe weather country. I had begun to learn a lot about severe weather, and I had this great opportunity to work for Hearst. And Hearst was a company that was well known, had good news, it had a good reputation. And Milwaukee, when I went up there to do the interview, and eventually when I moved my family up there, we really enjoyed living by Lake Michigan. And the one thing I remember is the couple of summers we were there, we lived kind of about 6 or 7 miles from Lake Michigan. About every afternoon in the summer when it started to get hot, we'd get a lake breeze. So inland it would be in the 90s and high humidity, and we'd be in the mid 80s or low 80s. And we even had one summer where it just simply didn't get hot at all while we lived there. We just loved living in Milwaukee. The severe weather, having tornadoes and forecasting tornadoes, and then they would send me out to do live shots from where a tornado had hit, and I would walk along and talk about how the trees are bent this way and turned that way, and this was definitely a tornado. Those were fun times, and I took the job because I wanted to learn about severe weather forecasting on a local basis.
And was that kind of, sorry, Henry, was that kind of like the last thing you pretty much needed to work on a little bit with severe weather? Because you pretty much had snow down the microclimates of Utah. But severe weather, except for a certain day several years ago when Salt Lake City had a tornado, which we may get into, that severe weather tornadoes, you really don't get those when you're in Utah, so you'd have to go to like the Midwest or the Great Lakes to get that.
Yes, and that's part of the reason that I took the job in the Midwest, and Milwaukee in particular. It was close to Chicago, but not, it was close enough you could go to Chicago and enjoy the benefits that Chicago had, but still far enough away. And it was in Wisconsin, which was a beautiful dairy state, beautiful rolling hills. Didn't have the mountains. I honestly have to admit I missed the mountains, but Milwaukee had this crazy weather, and the winters were severe. And I remember one time when we were about 16, 17, 18 below zero, and we had a real strong northwest wind, and the wind chills were just brutal. And those kinds of forecasts, when we used to get an Oklahoma hook low that would come up, and we always watched the low come out of Oklahoma and then move through Chicago. And that's when we would get the heavy snow about 50 to 100 miles north of the surface low, and where the zero line at 850, we'd watch that real carefully. And I can remember one winter storm where we predicted a pretty good-sized snowstorm, and it started out with sleet and freezing rain, then it went to snow, and then back to freezing rain, then snow, and we had concrete. It was about a foot deep, and the snowplows literally couldn't plow it. When they did, I couldn't back my car out. I got high-centered. I remember that in particular one day when it was so bad. Another thing they did with me is I did a live weather shot one time, and I was coming off the hill and doing a live. I had the microphone on, and I'm going down the hill live doing a weather shot. That was a lot of fun, too.
Henry, do you want to say anything now? Do you want me to
the only thing I will say is that were you, or I'm trying to get this straightened through my head because I didn't have a lot of time to prepare beforehand, but you said you went from Milwaukee to Utah, or?
I went from Salt Lake City to Medford, and then from Medford to the Weather Channel to Milwaukee, and then because this is home. At my 3-year mark, I was under contract, and so at the 3-year mark, I had an opportunity. I didn't know that it was Salt Lake that was looking at me, but I had been talking with the news director at the station I'm working for now for 7 years. So I had been kind of massaging that contact, talking with him, but never real pushy. I had been involved when I was at the Weather Channel in one focus group at the station, and they hired another individual to be the chief meteorologist. And about 3 years later, was in Milwaukee, and I was contacted by a company called Don Fitzpatrick and Associates. They no longer exist, but they used to be the clearinghouse where all the meteorologists and weathercasters would send their videos, and then companies would pay them so that they could come in and see all of their videos that were in their archives. And I had sent off in a blind box to a top 40 market. I didn't know it was Salt Lake at the time. And I was in Milwaukee, and I probably wouldn't have left Milwaukee unless it was Salt Lake City, because I was enjoying Milwaukee so much. But it turned out it was Salt Lake City, and it was the news director I'd been working with for 7 years and talking to, and they'd done focus groups, and they hired me to be the chief meteorologist in 1992 at this same station I'm working for now.
So do you ever miss the, I know Utah isn't to one of those in the big severe weather states. Do you ever miss kind of having the good old severe weather season with the tornadoes and worrying about severe weather every other week?
I miss it all the time, because when I worked at the Weather Channel, I was in Atlanta, of course, and we had our severe weather season. I literally had one tornado when I was in Atlanta bounce over the house when I was there. So, and I was watching it, and I was listening to National Weather Service radar and watching the Weather Channel, as well as a local radar that was put on by one of the local TV stations. It was on cable, and I knew that the tornado was coming close. I just didn't know it was going to bounce over the house, but it was a little F1, EF1 that was bouncing on the ground, and it literally tore trees down on the street, down the street from me. It went over my house and then sheared trees off all the way down the street that went east-west. And so I love the severe weather, and I do miss it. Like you talked about earlier, we had a tornado here. It was an EF2 in 1999. It happened on August 11th. Very unusual to have that large of a tornado, and then it went right through the downtown Salt Lake City area. We don't see that very often here, and I miss it, I have to admit.
What is, aside from severe weather, what is probably the biggest event you've covered during your time in Utah? What was the big headliner that you had to cover during your time there?
We have several events where we get a lot of snow. And other than the tornado, we had, during 1993, we had 50 inches of snow in 1 month. And most of it fell between the 6th and 10th of January 1993, and that was a huge snowstorm that we had, and it basically shut the city down. They had to bring the National Guard out. Some of our bench areas that I mentioned get a lot more snow than the airport, had over 100 inches of snow, and at some point there was 6-7 feet of snow on the ground where people were living, hundreds of thousands of people, and that was an event that I'll never forget, because it turns out that's the biggest storm we've ever had when one storm is a continuous snowstorm. But we continue to have those kinds of events every once in a while, and I love forecasting the snowstorms. Our lake effect storms here are surprisingly big. A lot of people don't realize that the Great Salt Lake, when it's warm, and you know, in the wintertime, because it's so full of salt, it doesn't freeze. It can get down to 24 degrees. Literally, the water is that cold, but it doesn't freeze. So in the fall, when it's warm and these cold air masses move over the Great Salt Lake, downwind of the lake we'll get snow squalls. And I've seen it snow 2 or 3 feet in Salt Lake County and Davis County, which are right southeast of the lake, and you can have no snow to the north and no snow to the south. It's just amazing.
And before I let Jeff take this back over, did you attend the National Weather Association annual meeting for this year over in Salt Lake?
We have a local group that meets, and it's part of that meeting here happened during a time when I was not able to attend, because we're short one person right now, and I've been filling in a lot on the air. It never fails, you know.
Part of being in Utah.
Well, when the AMS had their conference here, I attended in Salt Lake City some years ago. I attended, and I remember enjoying that. They were up at Snowbird, and then they were doing live weather shots from Snowbird, and it was a lot of fun. I'm a member of the AMS, but not a member of the NWA, so that's part of the reason I wasn't really aware of it. Plus, I just returned to Salt Lake City from Oregon, and I'm just in my new job, and I don't have a lot of time off right now, so it was kind of hard to take time off. When my weekend person, she went to Minneapolis, so we lost our weekend person. We've been short for about the last 2.5 months. We do have a new hire that she'll be here in December 1st. So in the meantime, I have to do all the fill-in. That's the chief meteorologist's job, is to fill in and make sure every show is covered no matter what. So I've been really busy.
Now, compared to when you were at Channel 4 now, you've been there since the spring, compared to when you were there back in the 90s and into the early 2000s, is there any differences, changes, and whatnot?
Yeah, it's been owned by two different companies since I've been here. It's now owned by Nexstar, and when I was there before, we were owned by a company called United Television, and United Television put the UPN network together. We were the smallest station of their television group, and they owned stations like WWOR in New York, owned KCOP in Los Angeles. They owned really huge, gigantic stations, and when they sold a lot of their companies to Fox, and they made duopolies out of them. And we were kind of left, you know, without an owner, and we were purchased by Clear Channel. And Clear Channel was a radio group owner, and they didn't know how to run television stations very well. So uh, our ratings went to #2 while I was here in the '90s and early 2000s. So we made a lot of money. This station was very profitable. But since then, they've changed anchors and changed anchors and changed anchors, and so now I've come back to be a person or a face that's well known, and so that the station can start to recover. And Nexstar is a company that's very local oriented. So they believe in news. They also believe in weather, and weather's like their #1 top priority because most of Nexstar stations are in severe weather markets. So they perceive weather as being very important, and it is here. People care about it. The #1 reason people watch news here in Utah is because of weather, or breaking news. They say breaking news, but usually it's breaking weather.
I know that the company bought a lot of stations in Iowa because they hadn't been in this state, and they bought a lot of the stations in this area that were kind of low rated. So I have seen that they do very well with local news and local weather because they have to. But I think it's mainly because they wanted the political ads because we have to.
I don't know much about that. I try to stay out of the politics, if you'll pardon the pun, but I do feel very strongly in talking with the management that is in Dallas that has worked with me. They seem to be very much interested in the weather and making sure that weather is a high priority. When they hired me back the second time, they went through quite a process because they wanted to make sure that this hire was something that would help the station. I mean, they didn't know me before. They didn't know what my Q ratings were here in Salt Lake City and in Utah. But when they did the focus groups, they found out that I was fairly popular, that people knew my name, they knew who I was. And once they caught on to that, then they realized that I would be a nice addition back to their station. And I really care about weather. I make it a top priority. I eat, drink, and sleep weather. I have all my life, and that's what makes it fun.
And so that's why you've been, even when you left the station you're at now, Channel 4, you went to all the other Salt Lake stations because of your Q rating. You were well known. You were very popular. I just That's how you got to the other stations in Salt Lake City.
That's correct. And then there was a time when there were no openings in the market, so I had an opportunity to go back to Medford, Oregon, and take a chief meteorologist position at the ABC station there. I'd been at the NBC station, and I went up there for a little while, and then a person that I'd worked with prior to, like 7 years ago, became the news director here at the station, and he was the one that initiated the conversation to bring me back. So I couldn't resist. It was just too exciting, too much fun to come back to Salt Lake City, which is home.
I do want to just kind of break in here quickly. I am just looking through Twitter here, and apparently there was a 7.3 earthquake 150 kilometers northwest of Kota Ternate, Indonesia, and tsunami warnings have been issued. I'm trying to find more information on this somewhere near Indonesia, so something definitely to watch there. I'm trying to find more
Yeah, there might be a tsunami that hits the Great Salt Lake, even though it's Indonesia. Now we'll watch Dan get something from his people.
Well, we're getting the producers, yes. We're getting some updates on things, but no, keep talking about the tsunami possibility. We won't have one on the Great Salt Lake, except that if we do have an earthquake that's a 7.0, we might have the actual drop in the Salt Lake elevation, which would allow the Great Salt Lake to infiltrate downtown Salt Lake City if it dropped to 10 feet, which wouldn't happen.
Now, what would happen if, let's say, the super volcano at Yellowstone goes? You can answer that when you're done.
Okay.
Apparently, from what I'm reading here, a hazardous tsunami waves are possible near the earthquake epicenter, pretty much being near Indonesia. This is from the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center. No threat to Hawaii, of course, but definitely something to watch, as that's a pretty strong earthquake. And that's another thing we can kind of talk about there. I know there's been a lot of a good deal of earthquakes that have happened in that region recently. If you kind of want to talk about your experience with that.
Well, of course, we deal frequently here in Salt Lake City with the threat of a 7.0 or bigger, and the possibility is certainly there that we'll have one in the next 10 or 20, 30 years, because we have one every 350 years on average, and there are 21 parts of the Wasatch Fault that have slipped, and we've measured each one, and we know that some have gone 1,200 years ago, some 1,500 years ago, and so on. It's been more than 300 years since we've had our last 7.0 here in. So that said, earthquakes are something that I'm always watching and looking a lot of what's going on here in Indonesia. In fact, there's a volcano that erupted here just a little while ago, or is still erupting, and it's all part of that ring of fire where the entire ring is lit up, and that includes California, Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, and then down through Japan, where we've had, as you know, some of the worst tsunamis and earthquakes recently, and then, of course, Indonesia. So those areas are going to be a constant threat for earthquakes, and if you live near an area where there's a fault line, you're definitely going to be in a lot of danger, as we are here in Salt Lake City, because we predict that when an earthquake happens, there will be more than 30,000 casualties, 7,000 deaths. We'll be shut down for weeks. The natural gas may not even be restored for a month. Electricity, weeks. So folks here would be in a big pile of trouble if we had a wintertime earthquake, because it gets so cold here and we have inversions. It would be really difficult. We'd have to be able to sustain ourselves for a week before even like the Red Cross was able to come in and help us out.
Would it be worse if, say, Yellowstone blew up?
If Yellowstone blows up, we're all in trouble. I mean, literally, the caldera that's underneath Yellowstone, if that were to blow like it did 650,000 years ago, much of the United States would be in extreme danger of being covered by the ash, and also the pollution, or it's not really pollution, but the amount of smoke and sulfuric acid and those kinds of things that would be produced that would go up into the stratosphere would probably cool the northern hemisphere down several degrees Celsius, if not more than that. But it would also lay a lot of the ash down over much of the continental United States. Salt Lake City would be in bad shape. We would suffer probably a catastrophic, really catastrophic damage from a caldera blowing.
Okay, I'm hearing Henry making noise. I don't know what that means, but
Well, they're calling over the loudspeaker here.
That's what it was.
They get on the phone and they start making phone calls and trying to get people to come for whatever reason. So sorry about the noise in the background.
Yeah, there's some breaking snow. It's snowing in Utah, as if that's breaking. But because I happened to look that Salt Lake's under a winter weather advisory, and we can get into this and then we'll end it with our shout-outs. With the winter weather advisory, do you think it's too broad for what it's specified? Because here they issue winter weather advisories, because we're under one. The entire state of Iowa is under winter weather advisory, yay us.
And
For snow. But they also for blowing snow and all sorts of other things. Do you think winter weather advisory should only be for snow that is falling and not snow that is blowing around? And should that be a separate advisory, like it used to be?
I like the way the Weather Service had it before, but what I don't like, one of the things I believe in is consistency. I like to see things stay the same, and whenever anybody changes anything, it causes confusion. So if we're going to change it, let's make sure we change it and keep it that way, indefinitely. It's part of the reason that I believe in whatever the Weather Service is putting out, that I am a messenger, in that respect. I like to present it exactly the way they put it out, because I don't want confusion, and I think that's my obligation as a weathercaster. But then there's my own personal opinion too, and I do my own forecasting. I don't always look at what the National Weather Service puts out, but I do want to make sure that those watches and warnings are out. I'm not sure that the advisory or winter weather advisory or whatever advisories are absolutely clear and, you know, understandable. I would think, you know, the way we had it before was probably better in my opinion, but whatever they do, let's not, you know, be changing it every single year or every third or fourth or fifth year, depending on who's in Congress or who's the president of the United States or whatever. I mean, I don't know why they change it, but maybe they think it's better. I don't know.
Personally, from my point of view, the thing in Iowa that we've always had, and it's just bugged me personally because I've been through Iowa winters, of course, which are treacherous. And when they changed the snow advisory, blowing snow advisory, all those products over to a single winter weather advisory, in my city at least, when people think of winter, they think of snow. They think snow's going to fall. They think there's going to be inches of snow on the ground. They don't think it's going to be for blowing snow. I mean, when they issue a winter weather advisory for blowing snow or a winter weather advisory for now freezing rain or freezing fog, I mean, what I've noticed, people don't actually read the text. They just read the title of the product, in this case, winter weather advisory, the counties or cities, the time when it is, and bases off that, they think, hey, it's going to snow here from wind to wind, when in reality it's just blowing snow. That's always been my pet peeve because it's such a broad product, it can be issued for everything. And like you said, I mean, I see both sides of the consistency thing because the meaning of a winter weather advisory can vary from region to region. Like, if it snows like I'm not sure what your criteria is, but it varies from each office. I know we have two different criteria for our 5 offices. 2 of our offices follow one criteria, and then the other 3 follow the other. So it gets confusing when you try to do that the best you can when you present that to the public. You kind of just try to explain it, and that's really what meteorologists do. They take in NWS information, they do their own forecasting and all that, and then make it in a presentable way for the public to really take on easily. But, I mean, personally, from my point of view, it's really hard because the people that do listen to the Weather Service, that have listened to them for a long time, they see winter weather advisory, and they interpret that as snow. And then we could get into the wind advisories. I noticed that they are no longer doing winter weather or wind advisories for like around 10 offices in the plains because they're no longer needed, while the rest of us are still doing wind advisory. I mean, the consistency, say if you move from place to place, people are going to be thinking of their original standards of wind advisories, and they're going to be like, hey, it was windy today, but I don't know. I guess the wind advisory, some people use it, some people don't. Some people think it's a useless product, but I can see both of them.
For a wind advisory here in Utah, we do up to about 50 miles an hour. Anything over 50 or wind gusts 55, 58 miles per hour would be a high wind warning. So anything under 58, if we're having some winds, which we get a lot of wind here, you do too in Iowa. I think the wind advisory is probably okay. It certainly differentiates between the high wind warnings, which can do damage, and the wind advisory, which is inconvenient. But when we're talking about winter weather advisories and those kinds of things, which are more generic, I kind of like the way we did it in the past, or the way it was done in the past, when it was very specific for a snow advisory or blowing snow and snow advisory, rather than the winter weather advisory. I like the way we did it in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's confusing for many here. I mean, we do the best we can, but the people that do see what the National Weather Service puts out are via automated products. They don't bother to read much anymore. I mean, they don't really look at the text. They just look at the headline of it. So that's where you kind of really have to go away and just be more specific when you're summarizing it. I mean, just saying winter weather advisory flat out, I mean, you can't just spend your entire forecast period talking about this winter weather advisory, and you just got to kind of summarize the totals, the winds. We've all been through that.
Well, that's what I try to do.
Instead of focusing on the product.
I see you have a picture of me when I was at the Weather Channel.
Now, see, this is interesting. I found this. This is our guest, and look, he's doing weather in Iowa.
There you go. I love Iowa.
See, and this is storms, and there's big storms, and I don't even remember that when this was. It was in '89, but I don't remember what year this was, because '89 was not a very good year for tornadoes in the state, because we were coming off of drought in '88. So
Well, probably it was one evening of thunderstorms that came in. May or may not have been tornadic, but it was before the NEXRAD radar, so that radar is pretty low resolution.
this was I think it was the WSR 74.
Yes, it's way before we had Doppler, with the NEXRAD, so it was pretty low resolution.
So, and I saw that, and I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, I enjoyed doing the weather at the Weather Channel because we covered so many areas, and like I said, Bill Keneally, I tried to mimic him and learn every single city, county name, but I could never somehow, equal him. There's nobody who ever could. But I enjoyed learning all of the city names and the capitals and the main cities and the main counties where weather was happening. It was a lot of fun.
So anyway, that was that. So we can go to our shout-outs. You can shout out anything, a person, a book, a place, a news director, your competition, or whatnot, or anybody that you want to shout out or anything. So.
Oh well, I could do a shout out to to Bill Keneally for sure, and a shout out to Jim Cantori, and let me think, a former news director who was just absolutely the best. He was the one that I sort of worked with for 7 years before he hired me. That's John Edwards. He's the one that hired me here the first time in Salt Lake City. He's was one of my most favorite news directors, and my current news director is George Severson, and he's a great news director, very personal, very good, easy to get along with. So those are a few shout-outs I would do.
Now, speaking of all the Weather Channel people that you used to work with, do you still keep in touch with a lot of them now that many of them, except for Vivian and Jim, who are still there, do you keep in touch with the ones that you were there when you were there that aren't there now?
A little bit, but not a lot. I don't spend a ton of time staying in touch. I think it's a little easier now with Twitter and Facebook and so on and so forth, but I tend to spend a lot of my time focusing on my family and on the weather. I really become engrossed in doing the weather and the forecasting and staying focused on that, not so much on the past. I probably should spend more time staying in touch with my old friends, but I do. I mean, I'm in touch with them every once in a while. I've been in touch with Declan Cannon and George Elliott and some others, but it'd be nice to make some of those connections back up again, I have to admit.
For my shout-out, I'll shout out the great Dr. Greg Forbes. He's my favorite personality out of whatever's left at the Weather Channel, aside from Jim Cantori and some of the others. But I'll have a link to some of his work that he's done alongside Dr. Fujita. He's done terrific research work. He's a true icon in the weather community. Jeff, you can go ahead with yours if you have it.
Okay, I'm gonna shout out. Now I'm gonna think who I have to shout out. I'll take Peter Fujita then, because he did a lot of stuff with. Because there's several YouTube videos of him doing some tornado, especially the Jordan tornado in 1976. There's a large, about a 15-minute presentation on just that tornado that occurred in 1976 on June 13th, and that was so fascinating because there's not only, excuse me, he did a thing about the track of the tornado, but there's also YouTube footage of the tornado, the anticyclonic tornado that was produced right next to it. Oh, it's so fascinating. So, bless his soul that he lived in for a long life and was around at least through the 90s before he passed away. So, I'll shout him out.
So in closing tonight, Jeff, who's our upcoming guests for the upcoming?
Oh, geez. Now you have to get me because, and I might mention to everybody that this is, like Henry said at the beginning of the show, this will be his last program for a while since he's going into his basketball period. So we're getting rid of him.
Yes, I
anyway.
am part-time weather, part-time school, part-time
Yeah.
basketball. I am jack of all trades.
But next week we have another guest from the Mountain Time Zone, David Spence from CTV in Calgary, Alberta. We're going to complain about Alberta Clippers and why he's bringing his cold weather to our area. And then the week after is Black Friday. We're not going to have a show that Friday because everybody is going to be stuffed with turkey and going to shopping malls. So then we go into December. We have Matt Makins from KMGH in Denver. And then December 12th, we have John Vetter, or Wetter, I don't know how to say it. He's from the Hop WRF model. He's up in Minnesota. And then after that, we're still looking for guests. If anybody has any suggestions, you can send them to me on Twitter at IowaWX, or send them to my email at iowawx@gmail.com. And that's how you can get a hold of me. Dan, how can people get a hold of you?
You can contact me either through my email at KTVX, which is dpope@goodforutah.com. That's what our mantra is here, Good for Utah. So dpope@goodforutah.com. And my Twitter handle, try that again. My Twitter handle is @weathercaster. That's the one I've been using for a long time, or at Dan Good for Utah. So they can contact me that way or follow me if they want to.
I'm on Twitter at HenryC_Luker_WX. It's not Henry Luker. A lot of people get that, but the C is from my middle name initial. Henry Luker was usually taken for username. So HenryC_Luker_WX. That's my Twitter handle. You can contact me via email at henry@iewx.net. And aside from that, it's been a good evening with you, Dan. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you have any final words to say before we sign off for the night?
No.
Alrighty then. Have a great night, everybody. Enjoy your cold weekend for most, and try to find some happiness in this frigid cold. Good night.
Go to
God
your
bless.
local ski
See you
areas.
later. Bye.
Goodbye.